Hello. I decided to put together a demo of my toolset handling some complex problems, so you can get an idea of what kind of power it allows you when you can modify the rig kind of at animation time. So what I've got is a hand that's going to come grab the character, push them into the ground, lift them up. And I want it to interact with the animation I've already got going. So what this is going to mean is we're going to want the character to essentially dangle from the mid spine down, and upper spine and above is going to behave as normal. I'm trying to build this kind of functionality into rig in general for a one-off animation or for complex interactions is really difficult. But if we can just reconfigure the rig for this animation specific to the type of motion that we want to grab, everything becomes a lot easier. So what we're going to do is, as I said, create an FK chain backwards down the character spine. The character skeleton itself won't be affected. This is just rigging. Then FK legs, and we'll play with some space switching on how to have the character actually get grabbed. We're going to be pushing the character into the ground, so we want to make sure we have some different ways of looking at the animation controls so that we don't penetrate the ground. So we get a nice drag across the ground and then lift up and dangle. So those are kind of the problem spaces I'm going to show, is interaction between two characters or two objects. Reconfiguring the rig so you can entirely change how the animation behavior is going to be. And then also some tools you have to help handle something like dragging across the ground, where you want to make sure that the body parts don't penetrate, and you want easy control, and you don't want to have to counter animate as you make adjustments through the spine. So let's get started. First up, we're going to go ahead and get rid of our spine. We're going to bake and remove. This is just pushing everything back to the skeleton. We keep all of our animation, we just lose that bit of rigging. All the rig components attach to the actual skeleton, they don't attach to each other, so we can pretty easily break them apart however we want. And we're going to go ahead and remove the feet as well. And we're going to use what I call temporary rigs to change this hierarchy in just this one scene. So the rigging system is based off of you or the technical artist basically defining what parts of the character are riggable. So we have regions that define the base of the spine to the top of the spine. We have a region that defines just the pelvis itself, and arms and legs and so on. We don't have any regions that define maybe just the top joint or the joint chain from the top of the spine to the bottom of the spine. And temporary rigging lets you just grab selection of a joint, click a button, and it will rig an FK or IK. It will create temporary markup on the skeleton, so it's still using the base system. It's still actually marking up these regions, but it's not something that you have to go into like the region editor and manage. It just automatically applies, makes your rigging component, and then as soon as that rigging component is removed, it automatically cleans up the markup so it's not left on the skeleton. So let's try this. This doesn't use any of our control shapes that we already have. This is just temporary stuff. We're going to get some basic cubes. We'll have to just resize them real quick. And we want one from the mid-spine all the way to the pelvis. Again, we have to resize these a bit. I'm not going to get too detailed. That's probably good. This just gives us nice quick selection here. Two ways we can switch the legs to the FK as well. We can either select the IK and come to the menu, and there's this unique section depending on what you have selected. Or we can use the regions. Regions are going to be a little bit faster, because I can type in leg. I can use this filtered button. This will rig everything that's been filtered in this list, so just the right leg and left leg as whatever I click, or whatever I select. And we'll go through and remove the IK, bake the IK to the legs, preserve all the animation, build an FK leg on both sides, bake the animation back up. And this is a lot of baking, but it's because we're significantly changing the hierarchy of the rig, and we're not we're not having any animation loss while we do this. In my characters, I have this cog control. It's not actually part of my export skeleton, it's just a helper object for defining where the center of my character is. So I can just go ahead and reuse this. And we'll set a key there. Then, so we've got our reverse skeleton here. If I select this one, you notice that it's not behaving quite right because we're controlling spine 4, or spine 3, and then spine 3 is controlling spine 4, so this is acting like our center point. But we can also dynamically change the parenting of the rig components itself. So right now, the rig components are just bound to their parent in the skeleton. So like a spine 4 here is just connected to spine 3. But if I want to change that, I can do parent relationship, child, parent, and this button here. And this is redefining, again, baking all the animation to make sure that you don't lose anything, redefining that relationship that these are no longer following the skeleton, they're now following this central object. So now, if I rotate from the spine down, we actually get the isolated behavior we're looking for. Obviously, reverse rotation doesn't look great for skinning on this point, so we're going to be a little bit careful on how much we're rotating backwards. And this would be really similar if the character is doing crunches. So we've got our reverse skeleton. All animation baked in. We've got our central point to control from that chest point. So now we need to connect these two. So I'm going to do that with overdrivers. Whenever I bake the system, I follow baking rules. So if I were to connect this as an overdriver right now, timeline keys says, looks at the animation editor, graph editor timeline, and finds all the keys, the key range, minimum, maximum, and bakes across that range. I've only got one key here, so this would only bake one frame. If I switch to time range, it'll use my actual active time range. So we driver, driven, and we create a overdriver. And this is the changing of parent spaces in the system. So at any point you can change anything into any other parent space, and it will again bake all the animation, preserve what you're doing. We can also use that for creating interaction. So right now, let's bring this back over. You've got all the curves of this cog that are keeping it offset in this position relative to the hand. So really now I just need to find my contact point. It's going to be like frame 15 and delete everything off to the side of it that I don't want controlled. So now I'm holding in place up until frame 15, and then I'm letting go to the control of the hand. That handles that interaction. One of the other really nice things here is trying to animate the spine and the hips to rotate up and drag across the ground. That's going to be a little bit of a pain. We're going to have to make hand key selections. Let me turn off the skeleton for now so I'm not selecting things underneath. We have to hand key like these rotations. And the spine or the pelvis isn't really meant to be an FK chain from the spine in this skeleton. So our rotations are a little odd there. They're not actually straight down. And we could rotate and key if we want to. But if we ever change the hand animation or the connection here, then we have to go and counter all that motion. So what we're going to do is use aim constraining system. That's going to say aim this controller at an object. We're going to use a locator. Let's create that. Let's make it nice and big. So we got a locator. Again, driver driven. Let's start with the top spine. Start with the pelvis. And let's just start with the top spine. So the aim constraint here lets you choose which axis you want to align it to, or you can just hit auto. If you hit auto, it uses the relative position of the locator based on and the object. So this is going to be a negative X motion. So if I place it out in front of the character, we'd be aiming forward. So we'd be watching that forward axis. If I place it under the controller, we'd be watching the downward axis. So you don't really need to think about what axis you're actually working on. This is just if you know specifically you want to set it up to a specific axis. Otherwise, auto does some math, figures out what axis we're on, and applies that constraint. And again, the locator gets baked in that relative position, so we're not losing any animation. Let's bring this over. Working off of one screen is always a little bit of a challenge for making a demo. All right, so now we've got this locator. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to key this roll. The roll is like the roll around the axis. I don't want to lose that value of what my base pose is. Let's actually key it at that handoff point. So now I can use this locator as my look at. And I can start playing with what it's going to feel like to blow away a lot of these keys. Let's just see right now. Let's keep a couple. So after we get grabbed, how do I want this to react? We can go right away to like getting it knocked or getting the feet knocked out away. And then we can kind of settle on the ground. You can already see it's getting us somewhere. We've got this locator, it's following along. We go up, translate Y. Let's simplify these keys as well and take a look at that motion. If we want to keep this character dangling, all we have to do is lower this locator. Rather than letting it come up and be really tight, we just kind of keep it centered vaguely under where we want him to be set. You can go ahead and change that tangent. I'm not a great animator. I know this doesn't look great. So change what this curve looks like a little bit so that we're not quite as drastic right away. We've got a little bit of a delay, maybe not that much. Now it feels a little bit more like getting knocked off their feet. Then dragging up and away. And then we can delay this a little bit. Maybe not that much. Where are we? So we can hold this away from the character a little longer, so that we're a little bit more having this locator drag behind them and keeping that body up across the ground. And here we could probably look at starting to play with that roll value. Start straightening that character out. Really, we're just going to go ahead and do the same thing to all the controls through the body. So I'm not going to go through and demo that whole thing. This is just really to give you the idea of what's possible. If I wanted to finish this off, I would be setting up aim constraints probably for the entire lower body. And then you can offset the keys to like translate, rotate keys, or translate and roll keys. And we can offset those so we have some nice follow through and everything just kind of flows from being hit to dragging across the ground. Just for demo's purposes, let's just do the pelvis, and I won't do the rest of the spine, just so we can have a better idea of what it's going to end up looking like. Let's go ahead and duplicate that locator, pull it down, aim it, auto. Let's bring the animation editor back. Let's take a look at what it will look like if we just grab and lose everything after here. And grab our other locator. Wrong place to do that selection. Copy. Paste. Oops. Now I don't want to paste onto the constraints. I have the roll objects are a little extra added to the scene. I was just pasting to the wrong object. Let's make sure we copy from locator 1 and actually go to locator 2. And paste those keys. And take a look at these. Move the rigger out of the way for now. And then let's just go ahead and grab these and do oh, maybe a little bit too much there. You can just even delete that. Pull this out. All right, that's better. Again, we want to dangle at the end. Could just have them dangle at the exact same spot, but I like to have this separation kind of looking like it did in the beginning. And then the roll value is all we really need to pay attention to here. Let's pull it out just a little further. Finish that roll, so we're now just kind of dragging across the ground. start that roll front grab. Move it forward. Yeah, you get the idea. Now we're just dragging the character across the ground, using those locators as kind of our anchor to both the ground contact and the follow through and drag of the bodies kind of hanging. I find that's a lot easier than trying to manage rotations across a bunch of things. The motion we're really looking at is that drag. So let's look at an actual transform dragging across the ground rather than, these are both a little high. Yeah, so we're just going to use the transforms dragging across the ground. Rather than trying to animate rotations that just happen to line up to the ground. Yeah, and yeah, there we go. And we could continue to do the same with the legs, or you could just animate the legs in FK if you want to, and get them to straighten out. You can throw on an animation layer since we're working with dense keys. Maybe from here to here, we kind of want to drag the foot a little more. Again, you could rotate these and key like this, or again, just make another aim the leg, aim the foot, and so on. Yeah, that's what we've got, and let's just go ahead and hide our control shapes. The only thing that really bothers me is that the legs stay apart like they're still standing. Let's just kind of pull those in. We get knocked off the feet, drag it across the ground, picked up, hanging in the air. And you can already feel that kind of sway of the legs with really only just animating a couple translate channels. We could do the same with the upper body or apply other constraints. One I can't demo, and this is because I'm using Maya Creative and doesn't allow for particle simulations. But we have a particle constraint, which will automatically apply overlap to any object. So essentially the particle is going to drag behind the motion, and then the animation will get rebaked to that dragging motion. Yeah, pretty complicated interactions. Using a modular rig as an animation tool really makes this something like a quick process. We can change how we're looking at keys. We can change the behavior of the rig itself. We can do everything that's in service of what's the easiest way to animate rather than just kind of dealing with what the rig is or having to ask for a large rig change for complex motion.